But no tickets yet. Who knows? One
All
minute,
right, test this out, man.
last minute call. You're good. Very good. February 1st, we do that meeting. The lost. Yeah, we need to make sure they all know about that. That's 6, we gotta do food. It's 10 o'clock, they're gonna do a lunch after. All right, I got 7 o'clock. If you stand when we call this meeting to order. We stand for the invocation, remain standing for the pledge. Don, you want to lead us?
Yes. May we pray. Gracious Heavenly Father, thank you for many opportunities you've given us to praise and worship you. And thank you for this new year, 365 different opportunities we have to live a positive lifestyle, to help others, to do unto others as you would have them do unto us. Help us always, Lord, to be in the right place and to do the right thing at all times. And Lord, thank you so much for the opportunity to serve Thomaston and Upson County in this capacity as City Council, and always guide us, direct us, and protect us. Which in the blessed name of Jesus we pray. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes for the December 21st meeting. Receive those in your packet. Do I hear a motion?
So order.
Second.
Motion and second. Any discussion? Hearing none. Russell, call for vote.
Councilmember Greyhouse.
Aye.
Councilmember Middlebrooks.
Yes.
Councilmember Tucker.
Yes.
Councilmember Reeves.
Yes.
Councilmember Head.
Yes.
Next item is the adoption of the agenda. Is there any moving and
Yes,
additions?
if it pleases the council, I'd ask that item D be moved to follow our executive session, which is item J, and would add an item 4 under the city manager's report, discussion potential action and authorization to execute probation services agreement.
All right, you've heard that recommendation. Do I hear a motion?
So order.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, call for a vote.
Councilmember Greyhouse.
Aye.
Councilmember Middlebrooks.
Yes.
Councilmember Tucker.
Yes.
Councilmember Reeves. Councilmember Head.
Next item is from the city attorney's report.
There were some questions at the last meeting with regard to the Smart Bill contract that we had. I talked with Lonnie about the changes that I had requested be made. He has sent those to Smart Bill for them to review. One of the questions that you had was the contract term. I requested that that be for a year, and it would be renewable for an additional 4 years after that. But I advised that we could not enter into a contract for more than a year. Additionally, there was a question about whether or not they could just increase the price without notice to us, and that I told you that I thought there was a provision in there that said they could not, that they have to give us notice. And I just wanted to verify with you guys that I had looked back at that, and that was the case.
All right. Miss Oasis is sick, so anything from the city clerk's report this
Not
time?
at this time, Mayor.
Anything from the city engineer's report?
Not at this time.
So we'll move to the city manager's report.
First item for council's considerations, discussion. Will not ask for potential action tonight regarding the alcohol ordinance number 1159, specifically pertaining to distilled spirits. However, there were some slight modifications to the original alcohol ordinance that was presented and approved by council, and we'll detail those tonight. Do you have copies?
I do if somebody needs a hard copy.
So these are actually red line copies, is that correct?
Yes.
And it may be easier to work off the red line.
Is it the same as within our revised packet? This on our revised packet that was emailed
I
out?
believe so.
I'll just take it just in case.
Just
Thank
in
you.
case.
All right, so I'll reference page numbers, and this is meant to be more interactive, so if you have questions on a particular section or suggested modifications or need clarifications, please feel free to interject. So on page 2, just real briefly, gives a definition of brewery. Nothing substantial there. Moving on to page 3, I believe we had defined as restaurant. We changed that to food service establishment, which is detailed by the serving and provision of at least 50% food sales that are prepared and cooked on site. So change that name. On page 4, the definition of person has been changed. Under the original definition, person incorporated a corporation or partnership agreement, and this further defines what a person means as an actual individual or an agent, and it cannot mean a corporation. Moving on to page 5, you will see under retailer or retail dealer, we included their retail packaged liquor store. This is new and pertaining to the referendum that we had that went into effect on January 1st. It's just waiting for this enabling legislation. So you have your definition here of what a retail packaged liquor store, and was this the statutory definition? Right.
It is.
So we kicked around what to call it, but this was contained within state law, and at least, or says, which derives for such retail sale in unbroken packages at least 75% of their total gross sales. So that is what a liquor store is. Moving on to page 7, you'll see at the top 4, distilled spirits by the drink included, mixed drink. I think that was a nuance contained somewhere else within the code, and we needed to provide that inclusion. Is that
It was,
correct?
I've talked with Bill Johnston, who's handling the crafting our zoning ordinance, and he had some question about it, and so to make it clear, we just decided to clarify it that way.
Okay. Still on page 7, item 16, we have included a Class O, which will be our retail distilled spirits in original package. So for our liquor stores, we have enabled that license under item 16, Class O. Moving on to page 8, 26 subsection D. This has to do with the transfer of license once a license is issued for liquor store. Class O license, it is prohibited unless the new location, this is talking about if we have a licensed location, then they can transfer that license to a new location, but there are some caveats. They still have to meet all the conditions contained within the code, and any authorization for transfer would have to come back to mayor and council for y'all to agree upon that. It specifically says the mayor and council shall have the authority to approve or deny the transfer of location. So that was an addition. Page 9 at the very top, this has to do with the public disclosure piece for city employees who wish to hold alcohol license. As the old ordinance was drafted, there were some, well, if they meet X, then Y, or if they meet Z, then A. So we just changed that to the red line, that if a city employee wishes to obtain an alcohol license, that come before city council for full disclosure, just to pass the smell test and for full transparency to the general public.
Is that for approval or just mainly?
For
Just
public disclosure, right.
But are they gonna approve? But
If there's a conflict, they're still not eligible, right? But I wanted for all of the applications to be
Gotcha.
brought before council, if it's a city employee. Item H clarifies the failure to open provision for alcohol licenses. Under typical alcohol licenses, if they are issued a license and not open within 45 days, then those licenses are deemed void. However, we put a provision in there for Class O, which is our liquor store provision, and we'll get into the details of why it exceeds 45 days for license O. Still on page 9, Q4. These are some changes that were requested concerning the camera provision for package sales. There was some concern about employees having passwords and access to the security system. So the new language, the employees just have to know how to determine if the system is actually working valid, and that if there is a felony committed on premises at the store against a customer or an employee or the license holder, that they have to have someone to be able to be on scene to provide that video footage to the police within 30 minutes. That's what we're aiming for, correct, Chief?
Yes.
So that is Q4. Moving on to page 10, has to do with the sale of off-premise consumption. We had to add this in for our Class O, and Deanne, correct me if I'm wrong, but these are statutory distance requirements in the state law
That is correct.
with the provision of liquor stores. So that's straight out of state law. Page 11, a slight change here for Class B1, B2, and C1, and if you need recollection of what those actual classes are, you can find them beginning on page 6 in your ordinance and following on page 7. It will tell you exactly what you get per class license. Main detail here, first item for council's consideration is that Class O, which will be our liquor store, the recommendation was that the hours of operation for sale of distilled spirits and unbroken package be from 8:30 a.m. until 11:45 p.m. Monday through Saturday only. We do have a provision for our retail sale of beer and wine and also pouring by the drink. There's a provision in here where they can sell on Sunday up until 2 a.m. in some situations, but for liquor stores, staff's recommendation was that be Monday through Saturday only. And what's your thoughts on that?
Monday through Saturday only. You have the liquor store open on Sunday.
Okay. Class B3 and C2, which are our bars, right? We passed an ordinance that the bar license would be eligible beginning in February, that bars be allowed to be open up until 2 a.m. During the week and from 12:01 a.m. to 2 a.m. Sunday. So if you were the holder of one of our bar licenses, there will be 2 created, both of which would be within the DDA, that you could, if you were a holder of a bar license, then you could be open until 2 a.m. virtually 7 days a week.
What page are you on now, Russ?
Page 11, that is section E, D and E, sorry. So Y'all foresee any issues with the way that is drafted? And if not, we've still got a little bit of time, so if you want to make notes and if you get home and sleep on it and think about you don't like the way something's drafted, if you'll let us know, we can bring back recommended revisions. Moving down the page, still on page 11. This is just a provision, and I think it was either implied or not specific, but we wrote in there, and I believe in another section, that all fees and debts owed the city have to be paid prior to the issuance of a license. This just specifies that the city staff shall verify when somebody submits for an alcohol license that the eligibility criteria for that means that there are no fees or debts owed to the city. Item G wanted clarification for alcohol license renewal, specifically A1 and A2. For all renewals, the licensee must derive 50% of his or her gross revenue from either food, gas, or other means other than alcohol sales and lottery-related items, and specifically omits rental income. This was in the ordinance as a provision for eligibility. However, for a new license, you can't have any metric of verifying a 50% mechanism on terms of sales. So we changed that for renewals, to be eligible to hold that renewal, you will have to be validated that 50% of the sale comes from some other means excluding alcohol and or lottery. Moving down the page on page 12, this has to do with B1 and B2, which are retail beer and wine by the drink. They may purchase a daily or an annual permit to brown bag. The major change here, if you pull over to page 13, under section 8, we struck the brown bag provision for a Class C license, Class C being liquor by the drink. The thought being is if you have a pouring license, is there really any need to allow a brown bagging or for someone to bring their own bottle of liquor on premises? That might be a little bit much. So staff's recommendation was to strike Class C. No one has a Class C license as of now, so that recommendation was made. All right, section 9 is where we get into the heavy details of our distilled spirits ordinance. You can take your time, but I'm just going to kind of pull out the highlights here, and this is on page 13. The number of licenses permitted. So as drafted, once enacted, this ordinance will allow 2 licenses for the sale of distilled spirits by the package or liquor stores, and the continuation or the addition of licenses would be predicated on the city of Thomaston's population, meaning that initially we would set 2 licenses, and then once we hit the population of 15,000 by ordinance and readdress of council, then another license would then become available, and so on, tied to the population in increments of 5,000 population increase, as dictated either by the census or by the regional commission based on their population estimates that they publicize. So start with 2, 3 comes along at population of 15,000, and then incrementally every 5,000. Can come if council so chooses. Moving on to page 14, B is just a definition. C is the limitation of license. Since we're only having 2, we wrote a provision in here that the same person cannot hold both of the licenses, nor can a member of that person's family hold the second license. Item D, this gets into the process of how we are going to determine the license holder. So once the city council enacts this ordinance, it says that the city clerk shall post within 25 days a notice that applications will be accepted. So once y'all vote on this, then Oasis will issue a notice, at least within 25 days, that we're going to accept applications for liquor stores. It will also set the date for when we're going to receive the applications and the process. Item number 2 is an additional 35 days from the date she posts, and then not later than 14 days after the 35 days. So 35 plus 14 days from the date she issues the notice. At 4:00 p.m. we will accept those applications. They all have to be submitted to the city manager. There will be an application fee, which I believe is in a copy of the resolution. And that will be meant to cover my time, Deanne's time, Oasis's time, code enforcement's time, fire department's time, and anybody who is on the review committee for the applications we receive. And then we will have, now Deanne, this is I think where maybe your copy is a little bit different. Didn't we change? You want to walk them, because mine still has the 10 days.
You're talking about the next section number 3.
Yeah, you said 14, so.
Yeah, I'm working off my old copy, and I think we made some, didn't we make some changes on the
Well,
deficiencies section?
Just between the two of us, we were trying to decide what we were going to do with deficiencies. I had initially drafted it so that we put the responsibility on the applicant, that they have to make sure that everything's in line and that their application is complete with the plans, the drawings and all that. But if we want to, we can allow the city 10 days to review the applications and decide if there are any deficiencies or any that we observe. I don't want us to have responsibility if there's a deficiency that has come in on an application and we don't catch it. But if we see one, then we would have 10 days to let them know that there's a deficiency. And they would have to return that application within that 10 days from notification. So there's just different ways for us to work that. I had initially thought we would have 10 days to let them know if we see a deficiency, and they would have 2 days to rectify or remedy that deficiency. If they fail to do so, their application is not accepted. It does not go into the lottery.
So after closing, 10 days to review. If deficiency is found, they get an additional 2 days to correct and resubmit.
Right, because further down, I think the next section maybe, we actually give city 30 days to review
Okay.
and get these in line. So that 10 days is just at the outset of our review and investigation.
Okay.
So we just need to decide how we want to handle any deficiency.
So
We'll go ahead, Ms. Reed.
from the date that the applications are accepted, say you, on that day you receive 10 applications, what's going to determine what to?
We're going to get to that part. Just so. Yep.
Well, I guess, let's say that they get 10 days, or after 10 days, we review, we kick one back, they got 2 days to rectify whatever the issue was, so we get it back, we find another one,
They're out.
The way we've got it possibly drafted.
well, what if we missed it?
Then it's on us.
So, I mean, is there a remedy if that's the case? I mean, let's say that you review it and then,
Well,
I don't know,
what I have asked Deanne for, and what I wanted your thoughts on is normally in a bid or something like this, the city always reserves the right to waive irregularities or informalities. Meaning, we could all put 10 sets of eyes on it, but something might squeak through. But if it's in the best interest of the city, as long as we disclose that on the front end, we should be good. But what we didn't want to do was to have a time frame set, because we're only doing 2 licenses. Somebody rush to try to get something in, and it'd be totally incomplete,
right,
knowing that we're going to have a grace period and chew up a whole bunch of staff time trying to figure out what's wrong with their application. That's why we wanted to limit it to
And
the
that
2
can
days.
delay the whole process for everybody else,
Yeah.
which would be unfair. So part of the language that Russell and I had talked about, what we don't want to do is put it all on the city to find all the deficiencies. I mean, the applicant certainly should be responsible for their application. So we talked about maybe putting something in there, the city reserves the right and discretion to waive any minor deficiency, which in the opinion of the city manager does not substantially impact the the completeness of the application. But under no circumstances would the city be required to waive a deficiency. So we just needed some direction as to how we need to go with that.
Like we've had before, if, somebody applies and they put the name of their business as Coca-Cola LTD, but it's really Coca-Cola spelled with a K. And that's an immaterial that we can correct.
I think you need some discretion.
It really doesn't affect, the competition of the application. That would be an example of something that we could waive. So that section needs a little work. Page 15, very top, says the city manager, his designee shall collect all the applications which meet the criteria for the issuance of the license and draw from those collected 2 applications for each available license. All right, so the time for the drawing will be set and established by the city manager or his designee. We will post it, and each of the applicants will be notified not less than 5 days in advance prior to the draw. So what we're talking about is a lottery, Ms. Reeves. But we're going to take all the applications, we're going to screen them for compliance with our ordinance, and then all of those are going to go into a lottery. We're going to notify the people of the lottery, then they're going to show up. I have to certify that the drawing is completely random in section 7 with a method that I determine. And each application or each number or ball or however we choose to do it will then be numbered, lowest to highest. First one out is 1, second one out is 2, and so on, depending on how many applications that we have. So, item number 8, first person who is pulled out of the lottery that meets all of our compliance and has filled out everything shall be offered to the applicant with the lowest number. And the second one goes to the next one in line. Item number 9 gets a little complicated, and the best way to understand that is if you go to the last part of the paragraph under section 9 where it gives an example, because there are some distancing requirements set forth in state law about how close liquor stores can be to each other. So in the example, if Don pulls number 1 and Jeff pulls number 2, if based on the statutory limitation of the definition, Jeff is too close to Don, Jeff gets kicked out, and then you roll to the next one who is in compliance. Does that make sense?
Russell, before you go any further, you said that number 5, you said that you're going to draw 2 applicants or 2 applications for each license. So you're going to draw 4 names or balls or whatever the case may be.
No,
Well,
that should not read that way, no.
and maybe I may be misinterpreting what it's.
I'll change that to say 1
Yeah. Should be.
for each.
So everybody who submits an application's name's going to get pulled, right? And they're going to get numbered 1 through however many. And then by default in the criteria and some of the other provisions that we're going to get in depends on which numbers stick. It could be eligibility, it could be the ability to pay, it could be the ability to get a certificate of occupancy, and then everything kind of snowballs down here and starts over if nothing hits. But we're going to get to that. But for right now, we're talking about distancing requirements. If 1 gets pulled and 2 is too close to 1, then it defaults to 3. If 3 is too close, it defaults to 4, and so on until we have a license that is met.
Russell, what is the distance?
It's 500 yards right now, and I just
How's that? Go ahead.
looked at the statute and it's state minimum, because that could change. So right now it's 500 yards.
How was that measured, Dan? There's always been, is it door to door? Is it
Upper line
I
permit?
think we
Yeah.
defined that in our alcohol ordinance somewhere else, and I think it's the
And I have that.
front door to front door by means commonly traveled on the public right of way or something
I
like
mean,
that.
we probably need to, it seems like. which
It's
is good.
defined, I know it's defined in
It-
here.
Right, but I want to make sure it's the state's definition and state's computation, since which is good. We've, you know, to this point, kind of mirrored them, which is good. And I think you take the ambiguity out of it, and if it's, unless council decides to go, you know, above and beyond what the state is, but it seems like our logic is to kind of follow state requirements and computations, and I just think, you know, because that's always been, particularly when we,
That's why we defined it in the new
yeah,
one.
good.
Okay, so state statute on, specifically on distilled spirits package store says as measured by the most direct route of travel on the ground.
Okay.
So we can add that if that's what.
I mean, I just think it, just so everybody, it's easy to reference, so they know how it's calculated, and it's just for full transparency. and
Cause somebody's gonna come up and say, well, it's really, you know, I mean,
Yeah.
no,
I
it
just
says
wanna
right
hear
there.
what state law is, unless we want to do above and beyond that.
Well, I'm happy to add that there so they don't have to refer back.
Yeah.
I
So
would
we can
add
do
it,
that.
just add
Yeah.
it.
Be in, it's, that matches the state law.
Yes, that's what the statute says.
So they gotta be 1,500 feet apart.
Yeah. Well, you said 500 yards.
Yes.
Times. We'll be confused.
Sorry,
You look at his face like, what?
he was calculating in his head.
Yeah, I thought I got that right.
Sorry.
All right, so item number 10, the applicants with the lowest and second lowest number shall pay the license fee to the city on or by 3:00 p.m. on the 7th day following the lottery drawing. So once the lottery drawing and we verify, you got 7 days to pay the license fee. And the license fee for Class O is $5,000. In addition to the application fee, and that is the maximum allowable license fee per the state that you can charge.
And it would include beer and wine. So
And it's
it's a
beer and
package
Okay.
license for beer and wine as well.
Yep. So if you hold Class O, buy the drink,
It's one
beer,
license.
wine, liquor,
Not buy the
one
drink.
license.
By the package.
I'm sorry,
Buy the
buy the package. Correct. All right, so then it says here, oops, skip a page. If you don't pay the license fee by 3:00 p.m. on the 7th day, then the license is forfeited and it's offered to the next person in line. This process shall continue on and on until we have 2 licenses. All right, item number 11, upon payment of the license fee, the license which permits the sale will be issued conditioned upon the license obtaining a certificate of occupancy. So after they pay and they're issued a license, that license will have a condition on it, meaning you hold the license, but you cannot sell alcohol until you achieve your certificate of occupancy. So we don't know if it's going to be a brand new building constructed. We don't know if it's going to be a rehab job. We don't know how long, it's going to take for them to be able to sell. So they'll be the holder of the license, but it will be conditioned you can't sell until we get a certificate of occupancy. So building inspector will have to go in and certify everything. Chief of police will have to go in and certify everything. Fire chief will have to go in and certify everything. That license will be valid until December 31st, 2022. And then the person has the option to renew the license with the condition for an additional year. If the license is not granted without condition based on the certificate of occupancy by December 31st of 2023, then the license is forfeited. So that was the provision earlier. We were talking about 45 days to open. This being a new process, if somebody starts right now and they've got to do site work and they got to build a building and they got to get inventory, we wanted to give them a little bit of time to be able to do that before the license fell back, and we settled on December 31st of 2023 is the drop dead date to achieve the certificate of occupancy for the license. And that is all in section 11. And then 12 clarifies what we mean by day, and it specifies whether if it falls on a weekend or a holiday, then the day kind of rounds up to the next business day. Application and selection for licenses after the issuance of initial licenses. Y'all can read that at your leisure. I'm not going to go into detail on that right now because that is a provision that would happen after the initial 2 licenses went into place. And I'm going to skip down to item number F, and that is on page 18 of your packet. And one of the reasons we're not asking for action tonight is tied to item 1. The premises at which distilled spirits are sold by the package must be within the C2 General Commercial District. Mine says DT. I don't know if y'all's does, but that is going to be removed. We're not going to allow it in downtown. So you got to be in a C2 zone, and it's got to be at least 5,000 square feet for the liquor store. And the reason the C2 zone and why we have to wait is we're not going to ask for action on this ordinance until we have adopted our new zoning ordinance, which is slated for early February. February 1st. And here's why. Under the current zoning law, under our expanded uses provision, our zoning is what I call cumulative, meaning like C2 picks up C1, picks up R1, R2, R3. So if we just said it has to be in a C2 zone, you know, you get a lot bigger footprint under the old zoning, where the new zoning is more specific. We don't have expanded uses, and it has to be in a commercial zone. I've got a copy of the new zoning map that I can share with you if you have interest on where those new zones lie, but just spatially, primarily the northern corridor on 19, the southern corridor on 19. There's a bit of a corridor out 36, and there's a little bit of property out 74 to the west side of the county. But I'll get you either login credentials where you can review that, or if you would like a great big old map to look at a meeting, I can make that available too. So we're going to put it in a C2 zone, which is general commercial. C1 is primarily downtown. C2 is more on your corridor, and it's got to be 5,000 square feet.
Have we been given anything on the zoning order?
No, you have not. And I think we just finished it, last week? Early this week? So I've got the draft. I will email it. There's multiple iterations. I've got a clean copy, and then I've got notes that go with the copy, and then I've got a copy that gives you the old text, and then it's followed by what the new text is, so you can kind of see what we moved from to what we're going to now. And that's forthcoming, and I believe it's going to the Zoning Commission on January the 10th, 12th. Mid-January it goes to Zoning Commission. They have to review it, make recommendations. Then there's a couple of public hearings that have to happen, and it comes before City Council.
Russell, what's the difference, when I mean difference, the parameters, boundaries for the downtown district and the entertainment district?
So the DDA district is very expansive on every corridor. To the north, I believe it goes all the way up
Almost to United Bank.
to the triangle,
Yeah.
right? And then, yeah, it's pretty. It's easier for me to show you
Yeah,
on the
okay,
map.
but there is which one's bigger?
The DDA, the
Okay.
downtown district, is a lot bigger. Item number 2, the front entrance of the premises at which distilled spirits are sold must be clearly visible from a public street. Has to be kept safe and sanitary. We are going to allow them to sell tobacco and anything associated with the sale of mixed drinks or used in the consumption of distilled spirits. The following in item number 5 are specifically prohibited from being on the premise of the liquor store. Sale or offer of sale of lottery tickets from the Georgia Lottery, Gambling, betting, any slot machines, electronic machines, or other gaming machines of chance will be prohibited from the license holder, and you can't open or consume any alcoholic beverage on the premise. Item 6 gets into signage and what will be allowed. We do allow them some flat 8-inch signs, as in quotations, that they will be able to have. They cannot have any lit signs. They all have to be unilluminated signs, and it goes into detail on what that is. Item number 7, I've made a modification on mine. And mine says that no form of advertising shall be permitted on the exterior of any licensed premise, period. And that any advertising or brand or pricing with the interior of the structure shall not be visible from the exterior of the structure. Meaning we're not going to have a bunch of marketing neon signs on the outside of the building, and if they have them on the inside of the building, you cannot view them from the exterior. So they have to be displayed in a way where you can't see them from the exterior of the property.
Number 6 is statutory language. So if you're wondering where we got that, that came straight from the statute.
I'm also going to ask, and I don't know if Bill changed this or not, but any of the flat lettering that's unilluminated that they use on the exterior of their building in section C be counted towards their total aggregate, what's allowable in their zoning ordinance. So if the zoning ordinance says you can get 10% of your facade for a sign, if you put a bunch of letters up there on the side of the building, that counts in aggregate towards your 10%. So the goal is to keep it classy, to keep it less, to keep the sign, not so jumbled and it's very clear, but we're not marketing a whole bunch on the exterior of the facade. Item G is inventoried. So the license holder must have monthly, and I believe that may not be on yours, but we're going to change it to monthly. They have to maintain a monthly average of $500,000 in inventory of distilled spirits and a minimum of $25,000 in inventory of beer and wine.
Russell, I have a question about that. Do you mean for that to be in addition to the 5, or do you mean that to be inclusive?
In addition.
In addition, okay.
I'm asking y'all, right? So we've kind of kicked this around. Some cities do 750,000, some do 400,000. We've discussed having a larger minimum square foot, and then we've discussed having a higher inventory with a maximum square footage. Thought being, if you can't have larger than a 3,000 square foot building and you keep your minimum inventory really high, you ensure that you have higher end liquor and less stock of cheaper liquors. So it's really, whatever your preference is. I think this was probably a pretty good average on what we looked at in terms of minimum being 5,000 square feet and the minimum inventory being 500,000. So
I guess your samples of the cities that you referenced, what City of Griffin, City of Barnesville.
Yeah, I think, what was it? I think Jackson had
Cities
400,
Jackson.
450.
We looked at Lovejoy, we looked at Perry, we looked at Griffin. I looked at several different ones.
This is kind of the median.
I'd say so.
On both distilled spirits and beer
I
and
think
wine.
I just threw beer in there.
Some do just an amount period for inventory, and they don't really segregate it out. And so Russell and I just talked about the fact some cities do segregate it out and say 500 for this and 25 for that, or it needs to be 500,000 inclusive of that can be $25,000 in beer and wine. So we just need to kind of make a decision on that.
Item H just defines when a vacancy will happen, and it tells you the parameters of that. Page 20, section C, and I had a question for Deanne, and we're still rolling through this. But no retail license required by this division should be granted to any person if they retain or hire for the operation of the establishment any employee who's been convicted of a felony within 15 years of assuming the position to operate the establishment. And there's some question in state law if that conviction also includes parole or probation, meaning if I was convicted 16 years ago, but I just got off probation 3 years ago, how does that fit in? And we're still weeding down what that's actually going to mean. Yes, sir.
Okay, conviction under the First Offender Act. They complete the sentence, they're not considered having a conviction. How will that impact this?
If it shows up on the GCIC report as a conviction,
It'll be NCIC who will always show up because the federals do not recognize First Offender Act, but the GCIC, he will not show up on that.
well, if they don't show up, then we won't know about it. Right?
Well, and my question is the definition of a conviction.
My understanding is we have to look at the criminal history, and if it shows up on criminal history, then we have to do the determination and calculation as to how far back it went. Those are, state laws that we're gonna have to dig into a little bit, but this was what we had in it initially, and then the probation portion came up as a question recently.
Okay.
Russell, let me
Yes, sir.
ask you, what if somebody, what about the sale of a store? Well, once they got their place, is there, I guess they, like any business, they could sell it to somebody else.
but that person would still have to meet the eligibility criteria contained within the ordinance to hold the license.
Yeah, that wouldn't be considered a vacancy.
Yeah.
Um,
What about if somebody comes in later and says, man, I'd really like to have if they own several, I'd like to have a location in Upton County. How would they come in later and get in line? Would they end up being at the end of the line if they, and so that initial drawing puts in the.
I would think so. I mean, you could change the ordinance, depending upon how this first one goes, whether you like it and the first two are set. If we have problems, we can always modify it after the fact.
How things go through my mind, like somebody wanted to be in there and somebody had the third place. Could they sell that place to somebody else?
I think we put in there they could.
I guess too, that brings up, what if, I don't know how we track this, but let's say that I win the license with, if I was gonna apply, but if I got the license, what prohibits that person from selling that license,
I buy it from you.
yeah, as long as JD.
They're not, the licenses aren't transferable.
Okay. Is that-
But if
The
he-
licenses are issued by the city. You can't sell
But
it.
if he opens the liquor store and then I wanna buy the liquor store from him,
Yeah, but it has to be already built. It can't, the license itself can't be sold.
Correct.
but he could get the license, build the liquor store and sell it to me.
As long as you qualify.
Right, and and that license still isn't valid until you get your certificate of
Right, let's
occupancy.
assume that I'm up and running.
And you want to
Something
sell it,
happened,
and you
I'm
want to
done.
sell it
Yeah.
to JD,
Right.
and it's an arm's length transaction, and you make all the other criteria, and he meets all the criteria, then he would be eligible to apply for that license.
For $1.
I'm still on page 20, section 8, subsection 6. This is for bars and liquor stores. They have to provide us a blueprint and the scale drawing of the business facility as part of their application for consideration. And I wrote on mine that I would like to request elevations, facade renderings, and proposed building materials. and that we have some clawback provision that holds them to the build out based on their submittal. Meaning, you're applying for a license to be eligible. I want to see what you're going to build before I give you a license. I know I've talked to some council members who have some concerns that, you know, without specific architectural controls tied to zoning, you could wind up with a metal building, a 5,000 square foot metal building, and it'd be a liquor store.
So Russell, where's the detail of that, what architectural standard they have to meet?
We don't have that. It's a point of conversation. If you wish to include architectural standards, my only caution would be that it somehow contribute to the overall benefit of the public outside of any other typical business that you did not regulate the architectural controls. Meaning, why would you be more, you know, restrictive for a particular, and I don't know if you can be, maybe you can, maybe you can't, but I think we need to bounce some of that off DN before we put it in there. I'm simply requesting that as part of your application, you show me what you intend to build, what your intended elevations are, what your intended facade is, what your intended building materials are. So tell me on the front end what you're gonna do. So, I mean, if, you know, I would prefer some sort of masonry or stone, right? And I'm okay with a metal building, but I think we should protect the facade and the vantage point from the public right away as best we could. Something like we did with the fire station, right? You kind of have your brick facade on the front, and then kind of off to the back, it kind of tapers off, but it gives a nice visual impression. Section 11, consent statement. So this was just a clarification that, you know, the way it was written, and I think maybe we.
It was a typo as well.
Oh, and the
We had
typo.
2 Cs in that section.
But there was some question when it comes to fingerprinting or criminal history for an applicant, whether it's the actual license holder or the agent, and we would prefer that it be both. Meaning, if you live beyond the 30-mile radius and you hold a license and you name an agent, that agent and the holder of the license must have fingerprints, and then after your fingerprints are in the system, any subsequent check into your increments would not be re-fingerprinting, but it would be verification of criminal history. Section 12, page 21, that's where it talks about the criminal background for the agent. And that concludes what we have drafted for the licensing of distilled spirits. You pass the ordinance within 25 days. The city clerk makes a post. We make the application available. 35 plus 14 days after that, you turn in your applications. We have a certain amount of time to do a review, critique any deficiencies. They come back in. We publicize no less than 5 days when we're going to hold the drawing. We notify all the applicants. We do a completely random and objective drawing, and then they have 7 days to pay their $300 fee, and then another period of time by which the license fee has to be paid for the city. That license is valid to the end of 2022 with an option to renew through the end of 2023. If the certificate of occupancy has not been issued by 2023, then the license is forfeited and we start over.
Will this be posted somewhere for citizens to kind of look at it? You know, maybe
Yes.
some of the people that are thinking about it.
I will go on and post a draft and put a very big caveat, subject to change, working document, just so people can be familiar with it. However, after a clean copy is drafted, I envision some sort of town hall session, or maybe not with elected officials, but you're certainly welcome to attend, but more of an operational administrative Q&A with potential people who want, so we can, you know, hammer through some of these questions and and unsee some of the things that we missed. Yeah.
Russell, that license lasts a year with a?
So the first one is kind of a little bit different because we're dealing with a certificate of occupancy, right? I don't, if this process draws out till June, right, and then you can't get your store built in 6 months, but you went through all the trouble of the license. We're going to renew that up until the end of 23 until you get your CO. After your CO's in place and you're up and operational, it's an annual license, just like every other alcohol license. It'll term on 12/31.
But they'll have the option to renew it and renew it and renew it, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
as long as they meet all the parameters in our ordinance and everything.
And are there a set of things that could have that license revoked?
Yes, and they're the same type provisions for every other alcohol license we have,
Yeah.
right? You know, felonies, you know, misdemeanors, including the manufacture, sale, and distribution of alcohol. And then there's a due process procedure that's built in if there is a violation of one of those ordinances where they would come before council and a determination's made. And then you can revoke it at that point.
And does some of that reflect state law too?
If you look at section 9, the very first sentence that we would put under that class O is going to be in addition to the regulations previously provided in Article 2 of the chapter 6. So this will be, those provisions will be applicable to this class as well. And I've tried to make the changes that would be different for class O set out in this section 9. A couple of things, Russell. We anticipate or have noticed a public hearing for our zoning ordinance for January the 18th is going to be the first one. February 1st is going to be the second. And we had put in our original alcohol ordinance that we would have bar licenses available February 1st. We can't do that. We're going to probably have to revise that at the next meeting so that it comes after our February 1st meeting.
Because of the zoning change.
Yes, so we'll have to do something with that just at our next meeting so that that doesn't come up.
And I will get you all a copy of the zoning ordinance. It's like 200 pages long. So enjoy, and I will give you login credentials to our GIS system if you want to go on and look at the map, and I'll get some big ones made too if you want to review that.
Further discussion on this, we can do that at our next meeting, and then I'll need to have some instructions to get this ready for February 1st.
Would it be better to have a Friday work session for this?
Probably. We've changed it about 1,000 times.
that
We have,
we could
and
kinda-
what Russell and I didn't realize is that there are so many components in this ordinance that also affects zoning. So I've been talking with Bill Johnston the first of this week, last week, trying to get all the details in each ordinance to line up. So it's been a work in progress.
Next item for consideration is discussion potential authorization of the alcohol license and the application fee resolution. Do we need to push that until
We can just push that.
we adopt? You can review that. We had the fees in the ordinance originally. We pulled those out, so the fees for alcohol licenses will just be set annually by city council, and a copy of the resolution will be on file with the clerk. We can also upload that to the website. We did add Class O, and as we discussed, that is $5,000. So with council's permission, we'll push that until we get closer to the adoption of our alcohol ordinance, unless y'all have specific questions regarding.
Is it possible to get a copy of this alcohol ordinance with all the changes just in one?
Do you have that?
I can put it together.
Everything redlined since the original?
You talking about a clean or where you
Clean.
do all?
You want it clean, or?
I want it clean, but I want all the different things we've discussed to be included. I just want a complete copy of the ordinance.
The
Of the
entire ordinance,
The-
chapter 6.
Right,
Okay.
with
I
all
can-
the changes or corrections, just a clean copy of the ordinance.
I can try to do that. It may take me a little bit of time
Okay.
because Joel had started the chapter 6 alcohol ordinance that y'all adopted previously in September, I believe.
Mhm.
And, the way he had it set up is really hard for me to go in and the formatting part of it. But I know what you're saying, and I can try to do that, yes.
Thank you.
That might make it easier for you to follow.
Next item for council's consideration is discussion potential action regarding ARPA funding. As you may know, funds were appropriated as part of the budget for pay for employees at $3,000. There was some question by council members with regard to part-time employees, whether or not that would be applicable. I gave you a copy of a handout, and these are all of the part-time employees that we either have or have had. I will tell you that the general guideline that I was applying in the issuance of the ARPA funding $3,000 checks was that if the employee was here, right, when we cut the checks, and in good standing with the city, then they would be eligible for the $3,000 check. With one exception, that one exception being Mr. Ellington, who formerly retired a day before the check would be cut. I would ask, he worked during COVID, so he being the only exception. Then we have a whole bunch of other issues and questions for council, meaning they still got to be employed. When we write the check, we have some that have already tendered their resignation, and the intent was that we pay people that are still employed versus the intent of they worked during some set period of time in the past. We've had a lot of employees that have worked, in 2021 that are no longer with us. Is our intent to remunerate them with the bonus, and the way I was applying that was you still had to be employed and working now when we cut the check, with the one exclusion, and that being Mr. Ellington, because he retired and gave plenty of notice, and we were able to work around that. With that said, with consideration for part-time employees, if we did not deploy the same logic, meaning they still have to be employed with the city, then that's going to throw out employees like summer help or ice skating rink help. We know part of the people that worked. So if we're going to go back and compensate part-time people who aren't still employed, then I think in retrospect you're going to have to go back and pick up all of the regular full-time employees who have left our employment, unless y'all tell me otherwise.
Still need to be employed.
So if you're still part-time on the books right now,
Right.
good.
Mhm.
All right. So do y'all have a thought on the value of the remuneration? Or not remuneration, the compensation?
I think they should get half of what the rest of them get.
Half?
As far as part-time, do half, maybe.
So if you've worked 1 hour, and I'm just scanning here, I see some,
12
a
hours.
couple, 12 hours,
Well, that's why I wanted to bring it to
Yeah.
you and give you, because the question came up, and I have no problem. We do have some good part-time people that work,
No doubt.
that may be eligible, but then
no doubt.
and you got the 12-hour and you got the 240-hour, but the 240-hour was a summer position, they're no longer employed, and the 12-hour is, so you get into a whole bunch of
I think
complications.
obviously we all agree that you got to still be employed.
Right.
But I think but is it fair for somebody who's worked over at whatever? There's got to be some threshold compared to those who've worked, 12 hours so far in the year. I mean, is that? But
don't you have part-time people that are permanent part-time people?
We do.
Okay, so
Well, yeah,
those
but-
are the ones that I feel should get the, whatever it is that, we're gonna do for part-time people, but just say you have a summer worker, I don't feel that, that should be.
So
I love my
what
summer
about,
workers,
what about employees that work through personnel options?
but- But do work, say 12 hours every week.
Yeah.
I'm talking about who work 12 hours, period,
Period.
Mhm.
that are part-time.
Yeah, I agree. I mean,
There's no right or wrong, and there's no clear
Yeah,
break.
just
I
more
mean,
of a
it's
discussion.
an eligible expenditure, but, it's kind of, what's your comfort level?
I mean, I think it ought to be based a bit on how many hours you have, like 12 hours, their total salary was less than $200. I mean, depending on the bonus you give it.
So what if I did this? What if I took the highest amount of hours for, well, you could do it this way. If you took the highest amount of hours for a part-time employee and that was at 100%, then you just did the correlation based on the number of hours for the year.
Yeah.
That would be straight
Right.
math, and if you were the highest, you got X. I mean, that would work and it makes sense, but then you only got one person getting the full check. It's not tiered or cut off. That's just one
And
way
that
I
check would be, at 100%, would be half of what the full-time bonus would be.
I would just do cross multiplication. Like if I had 240 hours is to 1,500 as 80 hours is to X, and then whatever the correlation is based on
Would you not
that.
do that for just the full-time? I mean, you work 40 hours a week, say, you're getting the 3,000.
Yeah,
If they
but I
work
mean, these are annual hours.
Yeah.
But these are annual?
Yeah.
So I mean, so you do 40 hours, but you do it biannual, so that's what, 2,080?
When you just take if it's 40 hours, it's
It's almost
full-time,
like
they're getting
70 cents an hour.
3,000, add up the hours, and then apply that same factor on a per-hour basis to the
So-
part-time. So if you.
So if you did 2080 is to 3,000,
Right.
then you would
69
annualize
cents.
that.
69 cents an hour.
Yeah, I would just apply that way it's, everybody gets it, it's just
Even the
based on
12-hour person
hours
gets
worked.
69
Yeah,
cents an hour.
there you go.
I mean, I don't think you,
And divide whatever, the 3,000 is by two.
What do you? I mean, so part of the issue I have is what is the cutoff then for full-time employees? Right, because they all are gonna work a 2080, but some have all been hired during previous parts of COVID. So
Well, I mean, I think-
how far back do you
The
go?
max you're gonna get is 3,000, well, I guess because you're giving every full-time 3,000, correct? No matter if you were hired at,
We calculated it the same way we do raises because we're forever chasing cutoff
Right,
dates and what's
right.
fair and applicable. So what we've always done is if you're here January 1,
Yeah.
when we cut it, you're in. It's just kind of when you get hired as part of it.
so then that mine wouldn't work because it was determined based on working 2,080 hours as a full-time person for that year. But you worked all year, so you may have to go back to what you were saying with that factor.
What threshold are other cities of GMA operating under?
It's all across the board. You've got some that are paying out over the next 5 years. You've got some that are paying out quarterly. I think I just saw Columbus is doing, 9.1 million? And they're doing up to $10,000, I think. So, I mean, you've got it all over the board.
Russell, I think your deal of applying a fraction of the whole
Yeah.
is the most fair determinant, depending on how many hours you got in.
I think you just get, even though there's some that's full-time that's gonna get the whole 3,000, may have only worked 3 months. They're still full-time. I think you gotta consider them as the 2,080 hours. I think it'd be easier to kind of say what you're doing here. We're saying all part-time people, you're getting paid based on that,
So you just do a 2080.
divided by 3,000 times their, whatever they work.
Let me do this. Let me run the math on a couple of different scenarios, and then I'll show you what the math is.
When is
That work?
these checks will be cut?
Probably next week, maybe week after.
Is the amount taxable?
Yes.
It is.
Unless we pay in cash, but
I mean,
Lonnie told me I can't do that.
I mean, I think the IRS has, it's a bonus. Isn't there a particular tax structure for a bonus, what's classified as a bonus?
We got it.
Technically, you can't give public employees bonuses because it's a gratuity, right?
State George gave out $30,000 bonus last year.
Yeah,
I've always
We got
heard you
60
can't do that.
right.
I'll do whatever y'all want.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a methodology that
They
they,
probably called it something different. It's a bonus, but yeah, it's probably called
hazard pay.
something else.
The taxable, that's still good.
But yeah, they're gonna get that 30%, I think. It's about 30% on those.
Let me do this. Let me run some math, and I'll get that out to you, and y'all tell me which one you like. All right. Last item I've got is discussion potential authorization to execute probation service agreement. This is a three-party agreement that has to be signed off by the municipal court judge, the city of Thomaston, and our service provider. This is an extension of our agreement with CSS for the provision of misdemeanor probation services. I have conferred with the chief of police. They're in agreement. They're doing a great job. Also conferred with the municipal court judge. He tells me the same thing. There's no formal payment on this contract. They're paid out of probation fees that are collected by the persons who were placed on probation as part of municipal court sentencing. My recommendation to the body, seeing the city attorney has not placed eyes on it, would be for you to authorize execution of the agreement to enter into another term with CSS pending legal confirmation.
You've heard that recommendation. Do I hear a motion?
So ordered.
Second?
Second.
Motion is second. Any further discussion on that? Hearing none, call for a vote.
Councilmember Greathouse.
Aye.
Councilmember Middlebrooks.
Yes.
Councilmember Tucker.
Yes.
Councilmember Reeves.
Yes.
Councilmember Head.
Yes.
The only other matter I have, Mayor, is just a brief executive session to discuss personnel, and then there will be action following.
Any real estate or anything else needed? Nothing updated? Nothing? Okay. Just, all right. Is there any other business before we go into, I hear a motion to go into executive session on personnel? What was that? What was the score to Georgia game?
So we're gonna do the appointments after that?
Yeah, we've got some stuff to discuss, and then we'll do the appointments after that.
So I hear a motion to go into executive session.
So ordered.
Motion is second. Any discussion? Hearing none, call for a vote.
Councilmember Greathouse.
Aye.
Councilmember Middlebrooks.
Yes.
Councilmember Tucker.
Yes.
Councilmember Reeves. Councilmember Head.
Yeah.
I can tell with my house. I can tell all.
Yep. All right, we're back in regular session now. I hear any motions.
I would like to make a motion that we make the following annual appointments. City Attorney Deanne Wheeler, Deputy City Clerk Oasis Nichols, City Auditor LaShawn Adams, Municipal Court Judge Judge David Fowler.
All right, you heard that motion. Do I hear a second?
I second.
A motion is second. Any further discussion? Hearing none. Call for a vote.
Councilmember Grayhouse.
Aye.
Councilmember Middlebrooks.
Yes.
Councilmember Tucker.
Yes.
Councilmember Reeves.
Yes.
Councilmember Head.
Did you mention why we didn't?
You can.
Why did this?
So, the mayor pointed out that the city prosecutor is a contract position and not subject to appointment via the charter. So item D, the last section on item D for the city prosecutor does not require appointment.
So hearing that, is there any other business? If none, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor, let's go home.
Have a good evening.
Sign that.
Hope your team's win.
Me too. I'm gonna watch Joey take a dude when they playing basketball at 9 o'clock.
Y'all gotta sign that.
Gotta let the dog out.